from the Associated Foundation's Training Center aboard Battleship Iowa. It is another exciting episode of Scuttlebutt, the podcast of the National Museum of the Surface Navy. My name is David Campfield. I'm the Vice President, Chief Information Officer. And joining us today is Joe Sienkiewicz, who I promised I would not butcher his name. I think I got that right. He is the Chief of the Ocean Applications Branch of NOAA. And if I remember that correctly, that's the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. In the room with us are our usual slate of miscreants. We have our producer,
Hi.
the skater.
You're a miscreant?
I'm a miscreant now.
We have Nuts and Bolts with us. That's Mike Getcher, our Chief Operating Officer, Chief Engineer, Executive Vice President. And we have Kyle Abe, who is our Manager of Development. And so I guess we'll just jump in.
I'll start because I have connection here. And I've met Joe. Joe's been out. And as I think about weather here, I have to think about the ship. The ship is interesting. We're soft moored, as we call it, in the main channel of busiest harbors in the world. You know, it's just amazing here. And we have occasional weather events. And we've had a very significant weather event even in the past 10 years. I think it was 2014. Joe can correct me because he'll probably remember the name of the actual storm. But something down off the Mexico, I guess, East Pacific Rise or whatever, and it came up through the Angel's Gate and caused $50,000 in damage for us one day. And just in that one day, we had two tugboats on the ship for 7 hours just holding her in place. And fast forward a handful of years, Moran comes aboard. She knows Joe with some experience in the tall ship community, I believe, and we can get to that. And we ended up on the phone a couple times recently just with weather information that's relevant. And he's even hooked us up with buoy information off the coast here, and Joe can expand on that as well. So weather is a real issue still for what is known as a permanently moored vessel. Now, there's an interesting jurisdictional discussion there we may or may not get into, but it's critical for us to understand that. We are tied up just like any other ship, but we don't have the large number of crew members to deal with it. But there's 14 dock lines out there, and each one of them costs $7,000 just to keep the 45,000-ton vessel in place. So Joe's been a huge help already. He's given us some great contacts, some great info, and he's been out to visit as well.
Well, thanks. And so 2014, that was a hurricane. In fact, it was a rather significant hurricane as far as strength goes, was Marie, and it was born off the Central American, south of the Mexican coast, and many of the East Pacific storms do not directly impact land. Some can recurve and come up over Baja. This one did not, but it moved northwestward as it intensified into a Category 4. It was a major hurricane to a Category 5 and had a very large wind field. I actually read the report, I glanced at the report this morning from the Hurricane Center just to kind of catch up. And one of the key factors is not only the strength of the storm, but the size of the wind field, but also the motion of the storm. The fact that it moved in a straight track means it's a way for nature to really be efficient at producing waves. And those waves propagate out from the storm and they propagate northward and up parallel to the coast, and then can actually, what your vulnerability with Angel's Gate is a swell component that's coming, and you don't think of it this way, from the southeast. And that is basically an opening for swell to go through Angel's Gate and make its way up into the Port of Los Angeles Channel, which is what you experienced in 14. And again, this past September. And these storms, hurricane was hundreds upon hundreds of miles away. We talked earlier about an event in September of this past year. And I did look up and kind of figured out what storm that was. First of all, that was over 5,000 miles away. And the storm was long gone when the swell made it as far as the Angel's Gate and the Port of Los Angeles. Moving at about 30 knots, the leading edge of the swell. And in that amount of time, it was about a week from when the waves were born in not in a tropical cyclone, but in a winter ocean storm in the southern hemisphere, and came northward and then turned. The energy goes along great circles, so it actually bends because we're on a sphere, and actually was able to come up with the southeasterly from a southeasterly direction into the Port of Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's actually a critical thing. Most people think of us as just a safely moored vessel. We're just tied up, or we even have people come aboard and say, "Is this thing floating?" Which is hilarious to us, of course, but it's a big deal. And, that was a brutal week, as I recall it. 7 hours of tugboat action. I had, 8 or 10 people on mooring lines constantly adjusting. And it was even a threat for us at that time to potentially move the ship deeper into the harbor to get away from the mess.
Because it was 2014.
Yeah,
right?
2014. Yeah. It was a big deal. I was on the phone with the head of the harbor department, the construction division, saying, "Hey, either I get some help here for doing a certain thing or two, or we're moving the ship, and I'll just let you know where to go." It was really that intense. It's when you get a 45,000 ton thing like this moving, it can be frightening. Each one of those lines, brand new, can handle 400,000 pounds of load before it breaks, but trust me, they'll fail. And we lost, I think, 2 or 3 lines that day alone, as I recall.
Wow.
And David, you were out there too, and it was as intense as I ever want to be, dealing with a thing like this.
It was as much motion as I'd seen on the ship since I'd been serving on her, and we weren't tied to the pier when we were rocking like that. So it was
Wow. It was
pretty significant.
Yeah. So, but I appreciate the help, Joe. You've been a great help. The buoy information is super critical. You're able to interpret that. Maybe you can describe that briefly. Just there's a series of buoys offshore and so forth.
So it's true that the Port of Los Angeles combined with the Port of Long Beach is one of the busiest ports in the world, and carries or passes through an enormous amount of cargo. Some of it is containers, some of it is petroleum products, or crude oil. And so the buoys offshore are there to inform basically decision makers, whether it be the Port Authority, the Marine Exchange, tugboat operators, of the conditions offshore. But there's a special project that's that you're benefiting from, and that was initiated to optimize the draft of tankers coming into the Port of Long Beach. And the ships themselves, they're long enough. So if they are in a long period swell and they're pitching, they can pitch enough. So potentially, if they're deep enough, they'll ground. So this project, it's 1 degree of pitch on, I think, an 1,100 foot ship basically means they'll get within a foot of the bottom at a draft of, I forget what the draft is, 66 feet, 67 feet, might even be a little bit more than that. But so a project between government, the port, academia, got together, and how can we best observe and predict the conditions in order to make sure that we're not going to have an issue with a tanker coming in. And NOAA had a small part of that, Scripps through their CDIP buoy program, a part on the observation side, on the modeling side. There was private industry on the science side that was brought in, Army Corps of Engineers, and also in the port. So there's quite a bit of sampling observations that's done to make sure to protect the port with drifting. They're not drifting buoys; they're fixed more buoys. They're about a little bit bigger than a basketball, and they have an accelerometer on them that actually can sense the motion. And from the motion, knowing the shape of the buoy, you can actually derive the full 3-dimensional wave spectra, the energy spectra of the waves. Cool. And then from that, you can back out wave heights, wave period, wave direction.
Wow.
It's
pretty cool that something that small can actually provide that much information.
Yeah, I've helped deploy buoys overall. One of my early maritime jobs was for USC, Hancock Institute for Marine Studies, and we did all kinds of stuff, spar buoy testing off of the coast of Bougainville, of all places, and some other world ocean current studies information that we did. We deployed buoys for that. It's really kind of amazing, and that's 30 years ago. So there's some neat stuff out there.
Yeah, the only buoys I've ever played with are sonar buoys, and they're doing a different job. They're looking for things that are not waves.
What about the tall ship connection that you have, Marianne? with Joe.
Joe and I actually met at the Tall Ships America conference back in 2014, and he comes and does we do weather classes, anything that he can tell the tall ships industry so that ships are better informed and all of that. And he does other fun stuff too, like the briefing for the Transpac skippers before they go off. And I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about the preparation you do for that stuff, Joe. Because that was fascinating. I got to go to a couple of those with you and learned a lot. That's why I love it too, is like every time I get into a class with you, my brain explodes a little bit and then my knowledge goes through the roof.
Thanks, Moran. So I've been lucky in the sense that I think I've kind of been adopted by the tall ships community.
Definitely.
My first tall ships meeting was actually in 1998 in Boston, and that was after the loss of the Phantom in Hurricane Mitch. To the south of Roatan. They hid behind Roatan, and unfortunately, Mitch went right over Roatan as a Category 5 storm. There were no passengers on board, but the crew were on board, and they were lost.
And just before I met you, the Bounty was lost, and we're actually coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that, if you can believe it.
Yeah, that's this year. 2010, the meeting was in Long Beach on the Queen Mary, and that was my second one, and I've been ever since. And that was after the loss of the Concordia off of Brazil.
Yeah,
and no loss of life. Everyone was safe. They got in rafts and were able to be picked up, but they lost the vessel. And so that was in thunderstorms. So I've always sort of been able to adapt what my organization does, where safety of life and property is our mission, with weather information. So I've been able to sort of bring that flavor, and I'm also I didn't mention. So I was a mariner. I think I still sort of am, but I was formally trained. I'm a New York Maritime graduate. I know they call it SUNY Maritime for State University of New York, and it does say it on our rings, but we all call it New York Maritime or Fort Schuyler in the Bronx. And I drove tugboats in New York for 5 years. So I got to live the weather side before I actually formally became a marine meteorologist for NOAA. So I have that kind of behind me. And the tall ship community has been very good to me because you're weather sensitive, very weather sensitive. And I've always, in my own organization, when I describe, why interact with tall ships, you're slow, you're weather dependent,
yes,
and you carry precious cargo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and it's great feedback because those that work in the industry, in the tall ships community, jump in and out of that community and work in other aspects of the marine world. Moran's an example of that right now. So, or go to sea on other types of vessels. So it's a really sort of a diverse group and well worth engaging.
And I think you get a little bit back sometimes too, because I remember a conversation we had back in 2019 that was offline. It wasn't in. It was just a group of us sitting around the lobby after the day was done, about a big storm that one of our tall ships had gone through north of New Zealand. And, it was sort of like you had the actual data, the physical data, and you could give that to the captain so he could see what he was actually experiencing in person, and he could tell you his in-person experience to go with the data. So it's a good blend there of learning on both sides.
Yeah, it really is. And in that example, we exploited that even farther. We had an opportunity where I'm in a small group that's trying to sort of re-emphasize, almost like re-energize the roots of marine meteorology. Meteorology is what it is, and this doesn't. Hopefully, this isn't going to come across poorly. The roots, the word forecasting came from a British Royal Navy admiral, was Admiral Fitzroy. And he had the concept of basically using barometers to anticipate changing conditions and onsetting storms. This was in the late 1840s and 1850s. So he was way ahead of his time. And also used telegraph in order to have a central location in London to receive the barometric readings and draw maps. He was way ahead of his time. Anyway, so long story short, with our little session in the lobby of the hotel ended up being a very excellent talk by Captain Jay Amster at the American Meteorological Society meeting that following January in 2020 in Boston at the 100th anniversary of the AMS. And it was very, very well received. He did a fantastic job, and we worked together on it. We also can what I like is we get that feedback and we spread that to our own organization, to our forecasters, so they have a better idea. They're not just forecasting numbers; they have a better idea as to what the impact of the conditions can be, for those that happen to be there.
Yeah, you talk about weather with ships and the Navy and stuff. I think when we spoke the other day, we talked about the typhoon that these ships went through.
Typhoon Cobra.
In my personal experience in the maritime world, we used to run from hurricanes. We could see the weather facts and just go, well, that's not where we want to go. We're going to hightail it that way, and just literally run. And a lot of the folks who might listen to this have never had to experience that. They've never had to run from a hurricane.
Be happy.
Yeah, at least on the water. But yeah, that was a horrendous typhoon that these things went into. It was brutal. I think you'd mentioned it before, Joe.
Yeah, it was, and I did look up to see how long we've been naming storms, and that goes back a very, very long way, and that's a debate. There was Typhoon Cobra, and was in December of 1944. It wasn't known whether or not there actually was a typhoon. There were indications, and there actually was a report from a scout plane that basically thought that they had gone through what was the forming eye of a typhoon. It was a significant loss for the Navy. There were just under 800 sailors were lost due to older destroyers, older class destroyers, being light on fuel, on bunkers, and being in a very vulnerable position, stability-wise, in the typhoon, and in the conditions as the typhoon was intensifying as it was coming over them. So yeah, it was horrific. I mean, even Iowa, from what I understand, had a shaft. One of the shafts was bent, and had to go in the shipyard to. I doubt they straightened it. My guess is
it's actually a loss of the stern tube bearing.
I was going to say.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah. Actually, this is relevant. If you don't mind, I'll poke my nose in. This number 3 shaft. Guess which one is leaking?
Yeah.
Well, and not only that, but the line shaft bearings that I used to have to take readings on and work on in aft AMR, the number 3, the support line shaft bearing back there, was always troublesome. Yeah. Always troublesome. So that shaft was always. Even into the 80s, we were dealing with the effects of that.
Wow. Yeah, they put her in a floating dry dock in, I think, Ulithi or something like that, because the stern tube, the shaft itself had literally dropped in the tube. There's a picture of it. It's probably dropped like 4 or 5 inches. The stern tube bearing is toast, the cutlass bearing, as I would call it, from a boat. It's gone. And so when we had this leak that showed up 6 or 7 years ago, we tightened down our packing a little bit, but I don't know what other damage is inside that tube and inside that gland. So we haven't gone any further. It now puts a couple inches of water a month in there, and that's fine. But, it's something that literally to this day we are dealing with from 1944.
Oh, yeah. We dealt with it in the 80s. It was kind of interesting. I want to say it was Hugo. I might have the name of the storm wrong, but we were in St. Thomas, and we ended up running from a hurricane. And the officer of the deck chose to leave the captain's gig in the water a really long time.
Oh boy!
Because the skipper might want to go ashore in sea state 4 or 5, and so I was actually on the boat crew trying to lift that as the ship was running out of the harbor, and we were trying to get it into the davit while we were making way. That managed a number of scars on my hand and my first experience in the operating room here on Iowa. So it's people underestimate the power of water.
We're just thinking about how big those shafts are and how beefy everything on this ship is, and thinking about the damage that a storm did to it. What was the power of that storm? Yeah.
People don't understand the power of water. The ocean does not care about your ship.
Yep.
Right?
No.
Yep.
Yeah. I didn't think about that connection. I forgot about the 44 Typhoon and that shaft. It's wild. And that's not the longest shaft in the ship, but it's a problem.
No, it's not. Don't.
No, I can't. There's a comment painted on one of the reduction gears. Talks about the screw and the shaft, and
yes,
we'll just leave it at that.
I love sailor art, don't you?
I have a ring. I don't have it on right now, but I'll say this: my class ring has a screw on it.
There you go.
I'll just say that.
There you go.
As do all others.
That's fun. Cool stuff. The weather stuff fascinates me. I really do love it. And we're in a vulnerable place here. There's all kinds of things that are going to happen to us here in the harbor.
We were talking earlier today with somebody off the Constitution, and it's always amazing to me how the problems that we deal with today are the same problems that have been dealt with for hundreds of years in maritime.
Yeah.
You are always, and it kind of ties in my experience in serving on board here. I had the privilege of going aboard a Soviet ship in July of '87 on the first and only Soviet port visit since World War II in Norfolk. And it's the heart of the Cold War. And you go on board, and sailors are sailors.
Yeah.
And because you fight a common enemy, you fight the sea first.
Yes.
And then you can fight each other. And I've always found the camaraderie among sailors super special. It doesn't matter what flag you fly. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're all sailors.
That's fun. So, Kyle, in your vast maritime experience, do you have anything to offer?
Yeah, well, no, I was thinking more along the lines of, as the true civilian, kind of more disconnected from the technical side of things, the Navy side of things, etc., all the different components of the ship that we are trying to operate as a museum ship that nobody really thinks about when they walk on. You're talking about the wave and tides coming in and mooring lines, buoys, etc. All these things that you were worrying about, Mike, on a day-to-day basis, just to make sure that we can operate.
Yeah.
And so everybody comes on board thinking, great, we're on a cool museum ship. Look at all the history here. There's a whole team on our side that is concerned about the day-to-day.
We have to keep
operation.
an eye on the tidal chart is something that's really important to us. We have some up to 7 foot of range here in Los Angeles. It can be down as low as 3 feet or so. But we actually look at that before we tighten our mooring lines. And most people don't even know this, but it was discussed just yesterday. But we tighten those mooring lines, if not by hand, with a chain fall. And each one of those mooring lines, I actually had it wrong the other day when I was talking about it. It's they use circumference. It's 11 3/8 of an inch circumference. Once again, $7,000 per, and we have 14 of them. And just to be able to snug those up, because they do work loose, is a huge challenge. And it's a maritime component to what we actually do. And we're watching those tides. We have to do it at a certain tide depending on the spring lines and which way we're going. And I think I've had tugboats on the ship 4 times in the last 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah,
I was involved in only one of those, thankfully.
Yeah, and but we are in a maritime environment, and in fact we are floating. There's an interesting jurisdictional question. We don't have to get into it, but I'll mention it here, that the night that we tied up on June 9th of 2012, here, the Coast Guard literally called me at 9 p.m. and said, Mike, we're done with you. I was no longer under Coast Guard jurisdiction as a vessel. They look at the ship as a building. But I guarantee you we're not a building.
No, it is very much a vessel, and it goes back. I was laughing when you were talking, Kyle, because people come on and they're like, why haven't you fixed the decks? It's like, there is an awful lot that goes on under the hood here that maybe isn't visible to your average visitor that comes on board, because we do have to maintain the vessel, and it is still a vessel.
It is so obviously a ship that people forget that it is a ship, and that you have to do ship things to make sure that it operates. Yeah. And so to do what we do every single day has all of these factors behind it that are first and foremost before opening the doors to the public.
Yeah, and there's a mooring design that I have to follow that was agreed upon with the Port of Los Angeles and the Navy. And all these weather concerns are very legitimate. When we see things like that coming up, we're looking at our mooring lines and checking chafing gear. And we are a ship in a certain way of speaking, and we have to take care of it. It's a real deal. It's a real problem.
Yeah, and as a mariner, you walk on here and you're looking at the lines when you come on board, and you're feeling the way the ship is moving at the dock. And if it starts doing certain things, you're like, okay, we need to do something about this.
Well, in fact, I'll mention one other thing. We had let's call it a rough spell in October last year. So we first off, one morning the ships go up the channel in the morning, typically up and out or whatever. And some of these container ships are 110,000 ton vessels, and the mass displacement of water jerks our ship around a little bit. And early in October, it moved us so far north that we actually hit the fire main and broke one of our gangways. So, of course, we had the capability to repair that, but it took a couple of weeks scrambling. We had a big gala event coming up. We had to get it up and running. We had a small other issue that we won't talk about here. And then I started looking at the mooring lines. I think I came back from a quick trip to Colorado in just a few days and came back, and sure enough, the mooring line had failed. It was one of our spring lines, Joe, and it scared the hell out of me.
It was the spring line.
Yeah, it was the north facing from the bollard on the dock, and it was a big deal. And you start slipping the ship around 6 or 7 feet north and south, and it gets ugly quick.
Well, and mooring lines are their own different technology too. You look at the mooring line, and if you're a mariner, if you know what you're looking at, you can see that the line failed. It looks fine to everybody else, but the core has failed.
Yeah. It was actually stretching out, and you couldn't tell. And only I started seeing flat spots on it, and I said, "Oh crap!" So it was ugly. But I wish I'd had Joe here to help. But it's fun. Do you have any observations on the Iowa, Joe? I mean, anything else here in Los Angeles?
Out to see us.
Yeah.
I am a fan of the port and a fan of the vessels. I am amazed at the for Iowa, just the construction and the materials of the era are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
That the scale of the machining that went in and casting that went into the vessel, I don't think could be duplicated now. Just the materials are different and all. But so what you have is what you have, because there are a lot of things that are on there that aren't replaceable. So, and also I'm amazed you sit in a relatively exposed location with traffic going by that, is not small and has gotten bigger and bigger, and hopefully doesn't get too much bigger, but we don't know about that. But I find it wonderful that you exist in that location, and to honor the port, but then also to honor those that served on the vessel.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that you noticed the construction too, because it's a phenomenal piece of machining, and also just technology. I call it the space shuttle of the 40s. It's that sophisticated. Brilliant people.
It really is. And, I'm always in awe. I come out of a technology background, and you look at it, and the ship was done with no computer modeling, with no CAD. It was done with T-squares and triangles and drafting machines on paper and slide rules and smart people. And that's always super impressive. We're running up against a time stop. As always, I want to invite our audience to give us feedback on the podcast, ask us questions, tell us what you want to hear. Send that feedback to podcast, PODCAST, at labattleship.com. That's really stands for Los Angeles Battleship, but we like to say La Battleship. So podcast at labattleship.com. Send us that feedback. Any final comments?
Yeah.
Joe, thanks. It's been a great partnership to some degree here. I really appreciate the feedback you've given us. It's hugely helpful.
And thank you. My pleasure to take part today.
It's a pleasure having you. All right, guys. Thanks a bunch. This is a wrap.